Hey, Money Guy family, we have something you've got to watch. We've put together a best of video on 401ks.
That's right. For most folks, it's the single largest account that exists in their portfolio, so you better understand what it is and how it works.
It's Brian Preston, the Money Guy.
Do 401ks no longer make sense for your financial assets? And I got to tell you, this one upset me. And Bo, you can go ahead and bring up the headline because... And here's what cracked me up. 401ks plans no longer make much sense for savers. Well, I don't know why that much. That much
Not
kicked
no
it
longer
over,
makes
pushed
sense.
the needle over a
No
little
longer
bit
much
further.
sense.
But to me, this is bad look at me content creation. Because, and by the way, you brought up that there's very likely a conflict as well based upon what his
Who
the author's
is, yep.
background, the fact that 401k assets probably don't allow his product into there, so that might have played into it. But I don't like this because a lot of people who are starting out, you don't even know what to believe, what not to believe, and you see something like this and you very likely could get disheartened. You could feel like, hey, the system's stacked against me. Why even bother if everything's working against me? And I always want to pause and say, remember guys, 80% of millionaires are first generation. Now, and here's, how is that even possible? And this is something whenever you get the green with envy and you think, man, they must have got it from their parents, they must have got it from their grandparents. Remember this stat, 70% of wealth evaporates in the second generation. 90% of wealth is gone by the third generation. So that's why you have to have this cleansing cycle. It happens naturally. Don't let somebody tell you you cannot do this. I come from humble beginnings. Bo comes from humble beginnings. You can do it. Don't let some person writing a look at me type headline to get clicks derail you from making smart financial decisions.
So what this author did is he went through and he started trying to put out some reasons why the 401k is not attractive, why it's not something that makes sense. And so we thought what we would do is let's just respond to some of the points that he makes. Let's give you sort of our opinion on some of the things that he says make them less attractive.
So the first thing, I'm just going to go through a few of these things really quickly. The first is I felt like he used higher tax rates for 1980, and then he used the lowest possible rates for now. He used 2018 because that was the first year of the tax legislation. But here's the thing that I think is interesting about this. He used a 43% marginal rate, but he had to take some liberties with that because he assumed incomes kind of in today's dollars back then. And look, 1980, my parents bought their first house in they bought their second house in 1978. The house I was raised in was 1978. They paid $60,000 for it. I want you to take that in. That was not a misstatement. $60,000. This is a nice house, four-bedroom house.
For 4 human beings. Yeah.
You know, you see the same thing about Warren Buffett. You know, people always talk about he bought his first house for like 60 or 70. You have to realize 1980 was a long time ago. So when you see somebody who's making $30,000, $40,000, you're like, well, that's not a ton of. In 1980 terms, that was a lot of money. So to even get in the tax bracket he was using, he was taking some liberties. But then he used 28% capital gains. That is the tippity top of the capital gains back in 1980. He used 0 for today. Realize that, I mean, you can have a 23.8% capital gains rate today if you make enough money. And to use 0, and here's the part I don't like about what he did with the tax rates. As soon as an individual makes more than $40,000 a year, $80,000 as a couple, all of his assumptions blow up immediately. So now look, if you will be low income now and you're low income potentially in retirement, he might have some points. But I don't think that's the Money Guy audience.
No,
and I don't
not
think
if you're building wealth.
That's not even the median. When we've talked about what the median income is in the country right now, it's not where he had it.
That's
so
right.
I felt like it was kind of a glass half empty, pessimistic look at things to kind of make his point. And then, Bo, talk about fees, because he just assumed there's all this innovation that's occurred with your after-tax, your traditional savings accounts, but 401ks, they just kind of been stuck in old fuddy-duddy land and not making any changes.
Yeah, and we have a little unique perspective here because not only do we have a family wealth management firm where we help individuals and families with their financial planning, we also offer investment advice to a number of 401k plans out there. So I feel like you and I are intimately familiar not only with 401k plans, but how they've changed over the past 2 decades.
Sure.
If you just look at the last 2 decades. And in his article, what he found was he said the average 401k fees were 1.5%. And we said that.
I don't know where he got that. I think he just
doesn't
pulled it
sound
out. Whoop.
So what we did is we went to the 401k fee analyzer. It's a website you can go access. And this is including fund expense ratios, administration fees, and service fees. The average 401k in this country has expenses of about 45 basis points. Now, obviously, I will agree with him that not all 401ks are created equal. Some are better than others. But if you've been paying attention, the Department of Labor has been putting a lot of emphasis on 401k plans improving. So one of the things we have to do is we have to make sure we have really good low-cost options. We have to make sure we have really diversified options. So if you're in a plan that has average fees of 1.5%, it's sort of a dinosaur. It does need to be brought up to today's times because that's not what most 401ks look like now.
Go be an advocate. I mean, you'd be surprised if you went and talked to your HR or whoever your bosses are, explain. You might be able to build up enough grassroots support that you can make changes.
Sure.
Because then that leads to, because fees was way off. I felt like he just, once again, he assumed that you had to have a really low income, and then he assumed the worst on fees to make his scenario. Like I said, this is bad clickbait is what this was. And then what about this one? Here's another big issue. Where is the Roth?
Huge change that's happened in 401ks.
I mean, think about it. The majority of 401k plans now offer Roth, meaning tax-free savings opportunities. Nowhere was that mentioned in this piece.
Absolutely, and it's a huge benefit to 401k. So I think 401ks have actually changed and improved a vast amount since 1980, and I still think they're a tremendous vehicle to go about saving for the future.
Well, and that leads to, he talked about there's all kind of market pressures out there in the retail sector. There's actually a lot of market pressure on the investment of retirement products as well. It's like you said, the Department of Labor has really been coming down to making sure. The SEC has definitely been asking the questions to make sure you're using the best share classes and other things.
Notifying what the fees are for the plan every year to all plan participants.
So there's a lot of competition that's naturally happening that was kind of excluded in this article. And then this is the last point I'll make is I felt like he diminished the moral hazard of making 401ks easy to access, because his part of his solution, now like I said, you brought up a great point, he might have a conflict of interest here, is he's like, we got to get the money out of the 401ks and allow in-service distributions so that people can then take this money every year and go put it into lower costs or better investments by what he perceived. But I think that we've seen that sometimes you need these assets to have a moat around them to a degree. Think about that castle. You want the drawbridge where there's a very limited way to get it, because this is money that you'll need for retirement. And we've seen it now. I don't think it's money guy listeners and viewers, but I do think that there's a lot of people that are buying pickup trucks and cars and putting swimming pools in the backyard with 401k assets when they change jobs. So the only reason they're doing it is when they change jobs is because that's when they can get access. Think about if we could do this for employees who are active participants. That could be dangerous.
So those are the things that he got wrong. Let's talk a little bit about why we think 401ks are still valuable today.
Sure. So let's jump in. First, where did these things come from? How did we even get 401ks?
So we thought we'd put together a little timeline for you. And if we go back to 1978, Section 401k was added to the IRC, allowing employees to avoid taxation on deferred compensation. So if they wanted to move some of their income into the future, they wouldn't have to pay tax on it present day.
Were you excited when they passed that legislation?
I was super stoked. 78 was a good year for Bo Hansen. Was really excited about that.
So that is, it is interesting. So it has allowed employees to avoid taxation on deferring the income to the future years, but that didn't really change anything. Sure. What actually opened this up in 1981?
Yeah, in 1981, the IRS started allowing employees to fund 401ks through payroll deductions. So now, rather than deferring compensation, they could actually say, you know what? I want to take a little bit of my paycheck and have it go into my 401k account each pay period.
So 1978, building block 1981 is where they actually lit the firecracker, and then that's when this thing started building assets. And how successful have 401ks become in building assets?
It's been pretty remarkable. In 2020, 401k plans now hold more than $5.6 trillion in assets. That's really a 40-year period that it's gone from zero to $5.6 trillion.
So I always think it's important. So for these things to catch on, there has to be a why.
Sure.
Why did employers, because let's face it, pre-1980, defined benefit pensions were kind of what was going on out there. And look, this is not, I don't want to paint this all cherries, all unicorns and rainbows, that 401ks are all great news, because it was. I mean, it fell upon your employers to ensure that you came and you worked at a job, and then they loaded up your retirement plan. You participated as well.
Sure.
But then when you retired, that's why they're called defined benefit. They guaranteed the benefits you would receive at retirement.
Yep.
Well, as you can imagine, population's growing. Companies are starting to realize, hey, employees are starting to, it's not like you take a job in 1970 and you work for the 30 or 40 years. Employees are starting to bounce around a little bit. So they came up with this alternative, and this is known as defined contribution. Break out the difference, Bud.
Yeah, the big thing is defined benefit plans, the risk rests on the employer. They have to make sure that there's a retirement benefit that exists for their employee for the remainder of their life. With a defined contribution, the risk actually falls on you, the participant. If you want to have retirement assets, you are the one that are responsible for saving those assets to get to retirement, and then in retirement, managing those assets for your benefit. It was a big risk shift from employers to employees. And so it sounds like, folks who are working, folks who are building financial success have recognized that 401ks are a great vehicle to do that. If you look at the Ramsey Solutions National Study of Millionaires, 80% of millionaires acknowledge that they invested in their company's 401k plan. And most folks, when they reached millionaire status, they did so around their late 40s inside of their 401k plan. That's where they reached their millionaire status.
And that makes sense, because if you think about what is probably one of the best ways and one of the habits or characteristics of what I see in millionaires, and what it is systematic, forced, and continuous savings.
That's exactly right.
And what do you know what a 401k does? It allows you to systematize the savings, and it doesn't matter good news, bad news, that volatility that you face because of a pandemic or whatever's going on with a global recession. With a 401k, if you do it right, you set it, forget it, and you're buying the entire process. It is that type of process that leads to, by the time you're 49, you wake up one day and go, wow, all that money I saved has truly turned into an army of dollar bills.
So the natural question you're probably asked is, okay, I'm sold. You've told me that I ought to be doing this 401k thing. I'm in. I want to be a part of it. All right, walk me through now. How do they work?
Yep.
What's the simple gist of how a 401k plan works?
So let's talk about the first thing is you're going to want to know, and you saw this was the legislation that passed in 1978, but then really was lit in 1981, is that you get to put money in. That's the first thing. You put money into the retirement plan.
Yep.
And then that money grows either tax deferred or tax free if you put it in as a Roth type investment.
And so what that means is while you put the money into the plan, you're able to invest it. And every year, as the account goes up in value, as the investments grow, you don't pay any tax on that. But when you get to retirement and you start pulling that money out, you take it out, that's when you have to pay tax. If you built it up in the pre-tax portion, just like you said with a Roth, it also grows tax deferred, except for when you pull it out, then you actually didn't defer the taxes. It's completely tax free.
And when will you actually pull the money out? If you keep the money in a qualified plan, like the 401ks, 457s, 403bs, you can pull it out at 55 if you've separated service, or if it's in an IRA at 59 and a half, you have access to these assets. So you can see the whole, it's kind of like this big money machine. You put the money in, you kind of give it enough time to let it grow, let your compounding interest kick in, and then in the future, you're pulling that money out for retirement.
So we just talked about, Brian, how, all right, you put money in, and it can either grow tax-free or tax-deferred. So it sounds like there's a choice in there. Do I want to put it in on a pre-tax basis or a tax-free basis? Well, the next question that most people are probably going to ask is, how do I know? Should I do Roth or should I do traditional? How do I know what's best for me as a 401k participant?
And these are unique times to kind of think about this, because I always say it really depends. Depends on several factors.
Sure.
And we're going to go through those. I'm just going to give a few overview things, and then I want you to kind of go through each one. I think your age is going to have an impact on this.
Yep.
How far do you have from retirement? Because we know the younger you are, the more powerful your army of dollar bills. We also know what is your outlook? I mean, these are unique times. Yes, tax rates have actually come down because of the legislation that got passed at the end of 2017 that for the tax year starting 2018. But we know there's a lot of political discussion about taxes going back up. So all these things come into play. So, Bo, kind of bundle that all up and tell people what are the decision points they need to consider.
Yeah, so basically, if you're thinking about should I choose traditional, should I choose Roth, we think choose traditional if you expect to be in a lower tax bracket in retirement. So perhaps right now you're a high income earner, you're in the higher tax brackets, and you think that when you get to retirement, taxes will be lower or your specific tax rate will be lower. It probably makes sense to build assets in a pre-tax fashion. Or if you're someone who thinks later on, I want to do some sort of in-plan Roth conversions where I actually pay the tax and convert traditional pre-tax assets into Roth, then you might want to choose traditional. Those are kind of the two times that we think traditional makes sense.
I also think I'd throw in there, if you're somebody who thinks you go retire like 55, even 60-ish, you know, part of the FIRE movement, and you are going to go from a much higher tax bracket to where your income is going to get cut way off. You might be able to manipulate through Roth conversions or other things. That fits into the kind of that second component on why you'd want traditional.
So then if you're trying to figure out when should you choose Roth, well, choose Roth if you expect to be in a higher tax bracket in retirement. Either perhaps now you're in a low tax bracket, but you know as your career changes and your lifestyle changes, when you go to pull the money out, taxes will be higher. Or perhaps you think that legislatively taxes will be higher at some point in the future when you retire. Roth is probably going to be a better solution for you. Or, and this is exactly what you alluded to start with, Brian, if you're young and you expect that your income will increase and your lifestyle will increase, Roth might be a really great option for you. And then lastly, if you are getting closer to retirement, thinking about when you want to start distributing your assets, if you want to minimize the potential tax impact on your Social Security or your Medicare Part B premiums, you may want to build assets in Roth because when you take those distributions, they won't affect Social Security and Medicare premiums.
So, Bo, I got to tell you, that's, at the end of that, it starts going wah, 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 wah. It turns into Charlie Brown. We have some visual learners, I'm sure, that want an example. Can you kind of walk through traditional versus Roth? What are we talking about if you actually did an example with real numbers?
Yeah, so we think that case studies are always the easiest way to learn. So we're going to lay out Roth Ralph, and pre-tax Patty. Thank you, full-time equivalent Daniel, for those names. Ralph is going to invest in the Roth 401k, and Patty is going to invest in the traditional 401k, and then she's going to invest her tax savings. Because remember, if we put in money in the traditional, we have some tax savings. We're going to assume that she invests that. So let's assume that each of our two participants are 22 years old and they're going to retire at age 65. Let's also assume that right now they both make $40,000 per year and they listen to the Money Guy show, so they're going to save 20% of their gross income or $8,000 into the 401k. Let's assume that their salaries grow at 3%. And let's assume that their invested assets, whether it's in the pre-tax or Roth, are going to grow at about 8% annualized over their working career. We know that right now they're both in the 22% marginal tax bracket, but because their income is going up and because their income will be higher later on, let's assume that in retirement they're going to be in the 24% marginal tax bracket. And because we know that Patty is going to be investing in an after-tax account, let's just assume that the tax on any capital gains that she generates is 15%.
Now, we're going to go through the actual numbers, but I think there's some key things here. If I was kind of like reading Rainbow style, highlighting the things that I think people ought to pay attention to. Both of these individuals are young, 22 years of age, letting their monies grow until they reach age 65. That's a clue.
Huge.
The other part I think is interesting is that we have a big assumption here is that they're currently in the 22% marginal tax bracket, pretty reasonable. But we think because of maybe future income sources, pay raises, or maybe they even have, some other income streams like rental property or something, it's going to push them up into retirement into a higher tax bracket. So they think when they retire, taxes will actually go up. That's another clue of something they ought to consider. So go ahead and play out the numbers.
So if we just look at the 401ks, remember both of them are putting $8,000 in, and then that's going to grow each year. So on the surface, inside of the 401ks, Roth Ralph has about $4.4 million by the time he gets to retirement. And pre-tax Patty also has about $4.4 million by the time she gets to retirement. We're just looking at the 401k balance.
Wait a minute. Those numbers are the exact same.
Same.
But wait a minute. There's more to this because one is after-tax contributions and one is pre-tax, meaning you get a deduction when you make the contribution. How did we make up for that?
So let's remember that pre-tax Patty gets a tax benefit. Every time she puts her money in, she saves a little bit, and we're going to have her invest that. So in addition to her $4.4 million pre-tax 401k, she's also going to have an after-tax brokerage account that's going to have about $764,000 in there. Now, we know that in after-tax accounts, the money doesn't grow tax deferred. It gets taxed annually. So we just said, let's assume that account grows at 7% per year instead of 8%.
Okay. So you put a 1% kind of a tax
drag
headwind to it.
Yep.
Okay. That makes sense.
So what actually happens is at retirement at age 65, Ralph has about $4.4 million, but Patty actually has about $5.2 million.
So if we stopped right there, we'd be like, it looks like taking the tax deduction actually was a good thing, especially if you were disciplined enough to put the money to work. But you're like, wait a minute, there's more to this, isn't there?
There's more. Remember, Ralph has all his money in Roth. So when it comes out, it's completely tax-free. Patty does not have that luxury. So if we assign a 15% capital gains rate to the earnings in her after-tax account and a 24% marginal tax rate to her pre-tax account, we see that her total available balance, purchasing power balance of her assets is only about $4.1 million, while Ralph's is still $4.4 million. So in this scenario, two identical savers, it was actually more advantageous for Ralph to build assets in the Roth tax-free than for Patty to build assets pre-tax and save the tax savings each year.
So just kind of summarizing, the $765,000 of after-tax money, once you took into account like a 15% capital gains tax rate just on the earnings, not on all the contributions, went down to $741. The 4.4, close to 4.5 million that was in the pre-tax, as soon as you took your 24%, because remember taxes went up in retirement, that's what brought it down to the 3.4. Bring those two together, that's where we came up with the 4.1. Now, let me ask you, I just want to play the other side, devil's advocate.
Sure.
Because you said it right. Ralph would have been more advantageous because we assumed that taxes were going to go up in retirement. Plus, he was young, so you had a lot of growth here, compounding interest. If we would have flipped the script and maybe changed the tax rate from 22%, but it went down to a 15%. We just made a guesstimate of what rates might be in retirement. This would have probably gone the other way.
It would have gone completely the other way. Pre-tax Patty would have had more money. Now, let's pause for a second. And we talked about this a little bit in pre-show prep, Brian. Realistically, it's not this static when it comes to saving money. What often happens is, while we're young and we have lower incomes, we save in the Roth. And then as our income gets higher and the tax benefit becomes more valuable, we might start saving in pre-tax and taking advantage of the current tax benefit. And then as we age and our tax planning changes, we might go back to the Roth, or perhaps we split. Very likely you won't stay in one bucket for your entire working career. And that's what makes this part science, part math, but also part art.
That's great, though. Good job, FT Daniel, also in helping us put this illustration together. And that does lead to, because I think we have to understand, because we just alluded to, there are really two participants in this retirement plan. There is you, the employee, and your contributions. And then there is your employer and their contributions. But let's talk about when you, the employee, put money in, you have essentially, it sounds like two pots, but we know, because we get bonus credit points here, there's actually three pots that you're putting into. Walk through those three different areas.
So almost every plan, I'm going to say every single 401k plan will allow you to do pre-tax 401k contributions. So your contributions go in before tax, and then distributions are taxed. Well, a lot of plans, and this has changed over the last 10 to 15 years, now have a Roth option where your contributions go in after tax, and distributions are completely tax-free.
Now, there's something interesting about Roth 401ks, Roth 403bs, and 457s. I know Roth IRAs have income limits.
Yep.
As a married couple gets, right below $200,000, you kind of can't do traditional Roth contributions anymore. But Roth 401ks have zero income limits. You can make $1 million a year and still contribute to a Roth 401k.
That's exactly right.
Another thing I think is interesting, if you are not over the income threshold for Roth IRAs, you can do Roth 401ks and Roth IRAs.
Exactly
so
right.
don't assume you have to just do one Roth. You can actually double up if you qualify for each individually. Now, something that's probably a lot of people is going to catch them off guard a little bit. They're like, wait, there's a third one there. What? After tax, what does that mean?
They're actually, for some plans, now not every plan offers this. You have to look to see if your specific plan does, but there's actually a third contribution option called after-tax 401k contributions. And what happens is your money goes in after tax, you don't get a deduction for it, but the earnings grow tax deferred. So it's different than the Roth and it's different than the pre-tax. It kind of combines the two. So you put money in on an after-tax basis and the earnings grow tax deferred. Well, what's beautiful about this is we know that when it comes to pre-tax and Roth contributions, there are contribution limits annually. It's $19,500 if you're under 50 right now, or $26,000 if you're over 50. What's really interesting is if your plan allows after-tax contributions, you're not capped at the $19,500 or the $26,000. You actually can put even more money than that into the 401k plan.
Let's talk about the free money or the money that your employer is giving you. But walk them through how does that work and what are the components?
Yeah, so your employer can make the choice to put money into a 401k account on your behalf, which is awesome. They said, you know what, we're going to move away from the defined benefit, we're going to move away from the pension plan, but as a nod, we're going to put some contributions into the plan for you. And there's a few different types of contributions that they can make. The first and most common is called a safe harbor contribution. Well, the reason that employers offer this plan is just like we already mentioned, at the end of every year, 401k plans are required to do specific tests to make sure the plan does not disproportionately favor high income earners in the plan. Yep. Well, what the IRS came out and said is, hey, if you give your employees a minimum contribution, a safe harbor contribution will allow you as owners or you as highly compensated employers to put more money in the plan so long as you're taking care of your people. Well, the great thing about safe harbor contributions is they are immediately vested as soon as the dollars go in. So just like the money you put into the plan is yours day one, safe harbor contributions are the exact same way.
And what I think is interesting, because we see these take the shape of if your plan doesn't require participation, it's usually around 3%.
Sure.
If it's more of a matching type structure, it's going to typically require you to put in 4 or 5% to get that 4%.
Yep.
So that's because they're making it. And what's funny is that when you do these type of plans, that free money, we've told so many people, you do not want to miss out on that free money, that you're going to probably see pretty high participation. So usually you're going to see something, in the 3 to 4% range.
So safe harbor contributions are one type of money that the employer can put in. Another type of money is what's known as a matching contribution, where your employer says, if you put money into the plan, we'll put money in as well, but you got to have some skin in the game in order to do that. Well, depending on if it's a safe harbor matching contribution, it might be 100% vested, or if it's just a discretionary match where the employer says, you know what, if you put in 7%, we're going to put in 7%, or whatever the formula is. That's one other way that employers can put in money. And then the third way that an employer can put in money is what's known as profit sharing. Yep. And this isn't something where you necessarily have to have skin in the game. The employer says, you know what, it's been a good year, things are going well, I want to reward our people, so we're going to put profit sharing contributions into the plan. Well, the unique thing about discretionary matching contributions and profit sharing contributions is often, because it is a fantastic benefit for employers to make available to you, they don't say, you know what, this is your money immediately. They want to put a little bit of golden handcuffs on you to make sure you stay around. They love you, they value you, they want you to have this benefit, but only if you stay with them, only if you keep doing that. So where safe harbor contributions are 100% immediately invested, matching or profit sharing contributions might be subject to a vesting schedule. And there are really two types of main vesting schedules. The first is a cliff, where it says contributions are 100% vested after a certain period of time, usually like 3 years. So long as you've been at the employer for 3 years, all the money that the boss or that the employer puts in on your behalf is yours. You get to take it with you if you leave, retire, or whatever. Or they might have a graded schedule where you get a certain percentage of vesting over a certain number of years. So the most often one we see is a 6-year schedule where it's 0% after 1 year and then 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 after 6 years.
I do want to make one distinction because I know we have a lot of young. Our biggest group of YouTube viewers are actually that 25 to 34 range zone, and so that's the threshold where you're probably doing Roth contributions. And we get this question all the time where people say, "I'm doing Roth, but my son of a gun employer is doing pre-tax." What's up with that?
Why won't he put the money in the Roth?
He should put it in the Roth because that's what I chose. Here's why, guys. Your employer is going to take a deduction for that contribution. The way the government, just like they make you when you choose Roth contributions for yourself, they make you put that in with after-tax money because there's a promise in the future you get to let it grow tax-free and pull it out tax-free. They do kind of the same deal with your employers. Your employer is going to take the deduction now to give you that benefit. So that's why the money has to go in pre-tax. They didn't screw up. They're not doing you wrong. It's just kind of the way things are structured when you have employer money going into the plan.
So what that means practically is if you were Ralph or Patty who ended up with that $4.4 million 401k, there's a good chance that even though you did do Roth contributions, you'll have two different buckets of money. You'll have a tax-free bucket of money, but because the employer put money in on your behalf, you'll likely have some pre-tax dollars in there as well.
Let's pivot into advanced strategies. This is kind of the strategies of the millionaires, the rich and famous. This is what they're taking advantage of, and you can leverage these for yourself too.
Now look, this is stuff you might not have heard of. This is stuff that you just might not be aware of. So I think the first one we ought to talk about is what we call the IRA Isolation Strategy.
Right.
If you have a really good 401k available to you, it may be possible for you to isolate your IRA balances inside of your 401k and take advantage of a Roth conversion. Remember, a Roth conversion is when you convert pre-tax assets into Roth assets. Well, there are two ways you can do that. You can do it the taxable way, or you can do it the tax-free way. We actually like the tax-free way. Surprise, surprise. So if you are thinking about, can I do a Roth conversion, we have a little flow chart for you. All right, so if you start here, first question to ask is, am I over the income limit? Here's what you do. Google income limit for contributing to a Roth. If the answer is no, I'm not over it, just contribute straight to a Roth IRA.
Much easier just to contribute to the Roth IRA standard.
If the answer is yes, then you have to ask yourself, do I have any other IRA assets? Now, this doesn't include Roth assets, doesn't include inherited IRAs.
But it does include like SEP IRAs, simple IRAs. I mean, rollover IRAs, traditional. You're going to have, because you hear people about, I saw it on Twitter last night, somebody was asking a question about the prorating of basis on IRAs. And I was like, oh man, they need to know a little bit about this isolation strategy.
So if the answer is yes, you cannot do a tax-free Roth conversion under your current structure. What you might need to do is take those IRAs, and assuming you have a really good 401k with really low-cost investment options, with really diverse investment options, it might make sense for you to roll that traditional, that SEP, that simple, that IRA rollover into your 401k.
All the pre-tax assets.
All the pre-tax assets to zero that out. Because if you can get it to where the answer is no, I don't have any other IRA assets, then you can do what's affectionately known as the backdoor Roth conversion or Roth conversion strategy, where you can contribute to a non-deductible traditional IRA. You don't take the deduction, you convert it to Roth, and because the assets are all after tax, it's a completely tax-free conversion. Why is this a 401k planning strategy? Because the 401k is the thing that allows you to zero out those pre-tax IRAs. But you have to make sure you have a good 401k to do that.
Yeah, so that's what, if you are sitting on those SEP IRAs, the simple IRAs, because look, I've had them all.
Yep.
Well, if you think about my first company, you don't start off, back then they didn't even have solo 401ks. So you always started with a SEP IRA, then you graduated to a simple IRA, and then you started doing 401ks. A lot of you guys are probably the same way. You can roll those old IRA assets back up into a great 401k and set yourself up for some of these advanced planning strategies.
So that's advanced strategy number one. Advanced strategy number two, this is a big one. And this is one that we alluded to earlier. It's the mega Roth conversion, or the mega backdoor Roth, that's only available inside of specific 401k plans with specific provisions.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that we've spoke to a few corporations. We get to go in, talk to executives and others, and we see this on really good plan designs. You will see a lot of the plans will offer after-tax contributions. They'll allow in-service either distributions or in-service conversions right there within the plan. That's all the magical recipes you need, because that allows you to, as Bo talked about earlier, we can load up the $57,000 that you can put into these qualified plans, $63,500 if you're 50 or older, and then any area that you have that's not crowded out by employer match, employer profit sharing, you can go above the salary deferrals with after-tax contributions and immediately turn them into Roth funded contributions through a conversion.
So I'm going to give you an example. Brian, check my math, because math is not my jam when I'm doing it on the fly. Let's assume that you max out your salary deferrals at $19,500. Right. And let's assume your matching contribution your employer puts in is $10,500.
Okay.
That takes us to a total of $30,000. My math right? If your plan allows for after-tax 401k contributions, you could elect to put another $27,000 into your 401k of after-tax contributions. If you stop there, the $27,000 goes in after tax, and any of the earnings will grow tax deferred, and when you pull the money out, the earnings would be taxable. Unless you have access to number two. Your employer allows you to, in that same year, roll those after-tax contributions to a Roth or do an in-plan Roth rollover. Once you do that, that $27,000 of after-tax contribution turns into $27,000 of Roth, that then all of the earnings, all of the growth will be tax-free forever. If you think it's really cool to be able to do a $6,000 Roth IRA contribution, or you think it's really, really cool to be able to do a $19,500 Roth 401k salary deferral, then you should think it's really, really, really cool to be able to do a $27,000 mega backdoor Roth contribution.
I do want to kind of put some, because I've had some questions on this, and I know we're way in the weeds, but this is, the people who are hanging out now are the financial mutants, so they'll appreciate this additional depth. If you're a business owner and you know that you're either fully funding the $57,000 or the $63,500 if you're 50 or older, this might not be as exciting to you, especially if you have employees, because if you know you're already fully funding that, you have to worry about the testing issues. Plus, it's also, if you're in a higher tax bracket situation, do you want to go ahead and pay at that highest tax bracket just so you can do a mega Roth opportunity? So it's not as great for those people. This is really awesome for executive level employees, that this additional after tax is actually more money you're saving. It's more savings is what this enables, is why you get so excited about it. And then that more savings is actually tax-free Roth eligible. That's the part, that's the secret sauce that gets people excited. It is somewhat complex, and I have to clarify that because there's a lot of my small business owners out there who just salivate at the idea of having all this Roth money, that I always have to say, yes, but there's some catches to it. You have to check some boxes. You have to go run some census data, really nerdy stuff to make sure this is a good idea. So let's transition to another strategy. Bo, we call this multi-income source hacking.
Yeah, so one of the things that's really interesting, we already acknowledged that when you have 401ks, you only get one 19.5 or you only get one 26,000. no matter how many 401ks you have. However, that $57,000 limit that can go into 401ks is per unique employer plan. So if you're someone, perhaps you're a doctor and you work for a medical group, and then you get income from a hospital, and then you have a book deal, you have different income sources coming your way from different employers that are unrelated. One of the things you can do is via solo 401ks, if you have access, you might be able to max out one plan at $57,000 and then have another plan where you're also taking advantage of either profit sharing contributions or possibly even after-tax 401k contributions. That $57,000 can go across multiple different plans.
Remember, here's the key parts of this. Contributions that go in these retirement plans are coming from two sources: employees, employers. We know the employee money, that's your 415 limits, your salary deferrals. It's capped out. It doesn't matter how many employees, and companies you work for, and companies you own. You only get one 19,500. Now there is one hack on this. 457s. You get to do both. You can do 401ks and 457s, different code section with the IRS. But here's the thing I want to make sure I bring everybody back with these multi-income source hacking is that it's the employer portion that's enabling this, is because that profit sharing, that 20 to 25% of the income sources is what can fill up that second bucket for $57,000. So you've got a lot of income. This is for somebody who owns very successful businesses, very successful income sources, so that they can hyper accumulate and build this type of thing. But it does work. Now, there is one word of caution. Control groups, guys.
Oh, that's a big one.
Because here's what the government's always worried about with retirement plans. They don't want you to have some cruddy plan over here for your employees, and then you set up some really Cadillac loaded up plan just for yourself or your executives, so you're to the detriment of these people. They always want to, that's why they have all these control group rules, that if you have common ownership, and you can have a parent subsidiary where it's a mega company that owns 80% of the smaller company, you're going to run afoul of things because of the common ownership. You might have a brother-sister control group where you have 4 or 5 individuals that own multiple companies with some common ownership between the two of them. That is going to make you run afoul of this too. The biggest thing you can do is if you have, and I'll give an example, you can own a company and you have income coming in, but then you have this other thing out here that has no affiliation to this other company, and you don't have any ownership with the way you get paid. Maybe you're 1099 from this organization. You can then load up that profit sharing, and that's what's going to allow you to kind of have multiple source income that loads up these qualified retirement plans. This is really powerful stuff.
It's powerful stuff. If you're a high income earner and you have multiple sources of income, once again, the 401k can be a valuable tool in your tool belt, but it gets complicated. This is one of those areas where we talk about maybe it makes sense to know when to go pro, to graduate to the next level. Before you start trying to figure out some of these strategies, it probably does make sense to reach out to a professional.
And think about it. We didn't even talk about it in great detail, but another one that's like cash balance plans. These are additional plans. They're not 401ks, but you strap them on top, as another qualified plan that you build into. Yep. And what I think is interesting, this kind of is the Seinfeld full circle. We know 401ks are defined contribution plans, but I do think if you're in a very successful high income situation, you do bring back some of those components from a defined benefit. That's like a cash balance. So you can really turbocharge the savings, but also provide a benefit to some of the employees. It's a win-win all the way around.
How would you examine the various mutual funds in your 401k? What would you look for to differentiate the good from the poor funds? This is a great question because you may be surprised to learn not all 401ks are created equal. Yeah. Some 401ks are really, really good. Some 401ks are less than optimal. So what are some of the things that you can look for to know if you have a good plan or not a good plan, or good options, not a good options? The very first thing we like to see whenever we look inside a 401k plan is there a wide berth of low-cost index options? If I want to just go buy the S&P 500, or I want to go buy the total stock market index, or I want to go buy an international index, is there a good, really low-cost option in there? When I say low-cost, I'm talking like less than 20 basis points, maybe even less than 10 basis points. Go look at the internal expenses. Now, here's one thing to recognize, and we've seen this with clients before. We had a client one time who said, hey, no, don't worry. My 401k is awesome. I got Vanguard funds. Yeah. They're amazing.
It was an insurance-provided retirement plan.
We went and looked at it, and there were sub-account funds that were managed to mimic the Vanguard funds, but the internal operating expenses were like 0.8, 0.9, 1%.
A lot of them were over 1%.
That's not what you think of when you think of Vanguard funds. So make sure you look at the internal expense ratio of the funds inside of your plan. The other thing that we look for inside of a really good 401k plan is how diverse are the options? You may have 5 funds, but if it's large growth and growth opportunities and go get me some growth and I want some more growth and then let's have growth and income, there's a chance that all 5 of those funds are actually buying the exact same underlying stocks. You want to make sure that you're actually able to diversify your 401k well across a broad range of asset classes. So if you don't have a number of asset classes represented, you may have a pretty concentrated 401k, so that's something you can ask HR about. But understand that just because you're buying something that has a different name doesn't mean you're buying something different. Again, we've seen this with friends of the family and of the show, who they just bought the stuff that said growth, not realizing that the 4 funds they were using all bought the exact same thing. They had no real diversification at all. The other thing that we like to look for when we're looking at a 401k, now this isn't always the case, but we like funds that you can go do your own internal research on. So I like to look in a 401k, and if I can find the ticker for that fund, I can then go to Morningstar or Yahoo Finance or CNN Money or fill in your blank, and I can actually search that fund. If the funds that you're using don't have tickers, there's a chance it's still a really good fund. It's just a pooled investment for the 401k. Or there's a chance that it's some sort of sub-account that is wrapped up and it's not actually what you think you're getting. So where we can do our own external research outside of the 401k plan, we really like that.
I also would add, pay attention to your 401k option or the plan design options, meaning does it have Roth? I mean, that is such a huge planning opportunity if your 401k or your employer-provided 403b is a Roth plan as well, so that you can have some tax-free savings.
Yep.
Also, make sure that does it allow after tax. I mean, we see all kind of planning opportunities where you could, do mega backdoor Roth with the right structure. If they allow in-service distributions, there's all kind of cool plan designs that can be set up for you that you can. That will help you have the tools to maximize your retirement building.
This is the last thing that I'll say, and I always get nervous when I say this kind of stuff. Because generally I tell people, hey, when you go select your funds, don't look at the performance because our human behavior is naturally going to allow us to most likely say, oh, that fund did really well last year. I'm going to put all my money in that one. And then next year, oh, that fund, and you chase. But you do want to look at some sort of consistency on returns. If you go see a fund in your 401k, and last year it was up 50%, and this year it's down 42%, and next year it's up 13%, and the next year it's down 12%. If you're going to buy that fund, you better understand why you're buying that fund and what purpose that it serves in your portfolio. So I would look for some sort of consistent track record. Are your fixed income funds acting like fixed income? Are your large cap funds actually tracking a large cap index? Are the international funds doing what international funds do? Just make sure you do a little bit of research if you're going to design your own portfolio.
So Brian, today's question is one we get all the time. We get this from friends, clients, relatives, family members, and it's something I think that almost every person who has ever had a job is probably going to face. And it generally goes something like this. Hey, I just left employment. What do I do with my old 401k? Should I roll over my old retirement plan?
Don't you wish it was just that easy?
I wish it was.
This one rule is going to help you every single time. So guys, we're going to walk you through this because you really have 4 options. And we're going to give you, it's kind of nuanced, so you have to hang in there with us. The first one is cash it out. Show me the money.
Dare I say, this is the worst option. This is not the one you generally want to employ, but unfortunately, I think that this is the option that people most often pursue.
Yeah, now a lot of people realize if you have over $5,000, they can't just send you a check. But if you have a really teeny tiny account with only a few $100 in it, there is a good chance if you're not proactive, they will just send you a check. But I will agree with Bo. You should not cash your 401k out. So let's just put a big X next to that one. That's not going to be a good decision.
And why? Because it will be taxable to you if it's pre-tax or fast pre-tax dollars in it. And if you're under 59 and a half, there's going to be a penalty associated as well. So it is very costly to get access to those. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a family member leave a job, cash out their 401k, and that's what they went on vacation with.
And then they wonder why they have no money at retirement.
It's not what you want to do.
So the next option, just leave it at the 401k provider.
Sure.
Your past job, you've left there, leave it there. So here's why that might be a good choice. There's a lot of good companies that have partnered with custodians like Vanguard, Fidelity. They have these great 401ks, low cost index funds. And you're going to be like, wow, this is a good retirement plan. So it doesn't make sense to necessarily get in a hurry to take your money out of that account. So you have to take that into consideration.
There's also some tax planning strategies. If you're like a high income individual who's working through like a Roth conversion type strategy, you need to understand that it might make sense to leave your 401k in the 401k structure so it doesn't impact the taxability of future Roth conversions you may make.
So then that leads to option 3. Roll it over. Now the first thing, we just totally gushed on your previous 401k provider because it's at a low cost provider that I provided access to index funds, didn't have anything that was really punitive. But then, unfortunately, that's not all retirement plans.
There's are not all created equal.
401ks that have sub-account fees, annuities, high cost, just not good investment choices. So there's a lot of bad things going on. So when you leave that employer and you realize you knew you had a stinker of a retirement plan, you can set up an IRA rollover and do a trustee to trustee transfer so that there's not any tax consequences, and roll it into a low-cost custodian so that you can choose your investments and have better choices.
There are two really big benefits of doing that. You just said that it opens up the entire investment universe to those dollars. And then second, it's easy to keep track of. Now you don't have to worry about keeping up with the annual notices from your previous employer and having to contact your previous employer's HR if you have questions. It just allows you to take control of those assets so they're no longer associated with that previous employer, previous plan.
And then the fourth option, you probably, when you leave one job, you're going to another job, and your new job is also going to have a 401k provider. There's a chance you might get into one of those gushing plans that we love, that's low cost index funds. And if that's the case, you might want to consider rolling your old plan into the new provider, because what if this might be a just grow up and grows up. I almost hear the Mario growth sound in the background, is because you went from a bad provider to now you have the option of a really good provider. This is a chance for you to upgrade your retirement option. And I'll even say it, there's chances, because Bo alluded to the fact that sometimes you're in a high income situation, you make great income that precludes you from being able to do Roth contributions. There might be a Roth conversion strategy in your future, so you need to get these IRA assets out of your name. A good opportunity is if you have a good retirement plan, you can roll into the new plan.
And a common misnomer is that if you roll into your new 401k, you might be handicapped, and that might not be you, or handcuffed, and that might not be your money anymore. It's not true. Any money that you roll into your 401k, you are still 100% vested in. It's still your money. So it's not like you're locking it up in some different way than it was already locked up.
So if I could summarize everything we just talked about, it sounds like everybody needs to know some basic components of your options. You need to know how good are the investments at my current employer as well as the future employer and I'm going to. What are the internal operating expenses of the plans? My old one, my new one, and what options do I have in an IRA rollover I could set up? And then what is the compensation of whoever is giving me? So if you are taking it, maybe your 401k has commissions or it has really high fees, understand all those different things that are coming out of your account so you can make sure you're making the best decision for your personal finances.
What we know is that as our life cycle changes, as we age, the way that we think about investing in our 401k plans and utilize them, and even our savings rate, has to adapt as well. So we thought one way to kind of work through this would be to talk about average 401k balance by age. We're going to talk about where, depending on what age you are, where the average is in this country, and then what your total savings should be. And then we're going to give you some pitfalls, some things to watch out for, some things to be aware of in each decade and age and stage of life.
So let's jump in with the 20-year-olds.
Okay.
Now, look, I'm a little bummed because I'm the Rodney Dangerfield of this content team. It's because I wanted to change this to a big bowl of piping hot spaghetti instead of don't blow your shot. I mean, I think that this ought to be don't miss Mom's spaghetti. And this is, of course, a reference to Eminem and 8 Mile. I mean, because you got to get in there. This is your chance. When you're in your 20s, guys, there is nothing but opportunity. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise, because I know there's a lot of voices out there, whether it's the financial media, whether it's friends or relatives that have gotten older and maybe the system hasn't worked for them, that are going to be telling you 20-year-olds, hey, don't live for today. Don't worry about tomorrow. And I'm telling you, this is your chance. This is your opportunity to take advantage. Don't miss it.
I learned this when I was in college. The most valuable money you will ever save in your entire life is the first money that you save. So if you can create a habit early on in your early 20s, when you first get that first job, when you first start thinking about the future, and you can get those soldiers going into your army of dollar bills, you will be amazed at what that can do for you. Again, if you haven't gone to the website, go to moneyguy.com/resources. We have an illustration out there called How Powerful Are Your Dollars that shows you, if you're a 20-year-old, every $1 that you can invest has the potential to turn into $88 by the time that you turn 65. But if you wait, that power begins to decrease. So don't blow your shot in your 20s when you have the maximum earning potential on your army of dollar bills.
So we've taken it a step further. We've actually calculated some numbers. I'll let you kind of start pulling these up on there because I think this will make our point even more so.
So the first thing we want to do is do sort of a survey of where we are. Like, where do we stand relative to our peers? Well, according to 401k data compiled by Fidelity, the average 401k balance for someone in their 20s is $15,000. That's the average 401k balance that they house. Well, the average contribution rate for someone in their 20s, now this is not employer included. This is just for salary deferral elections by employees. For someone in their 20s is about 7.5%. So, it's good. Remember, our goal is we want you to get to 20 to 25%. But this is someone just starting out. I'm happy to see that we have 7.5%, that we're at least moving in that direction.
Well, look, and I'm not going to go too hard on my early 20-somethings because we all graduated, from either high school, college. We get out there in the workforce. It didn't all happen overnight. I mean, look, my goal coming out was to save $100 a month.
Yep.
I mean, that was really what I was shooting for because I knew $100 a month when I was in my early 20s. Did it long enough, compounded it. It was going to be $1 million just off $100 a month. But I knew eventually it grew into even more of that was the goal. I know by the time you close out the decade of your 20s, according to Fidelity, with the largest 401k provider, you do want to at least have 1.2 times your income, hopefully by the time you reach age 30.
So it's a really good spot check. If you take your current income, multiply it by 1.2, do you have that much saved up in your liquid portfolio? But we wanted to take it even a step further because we think when you are starting out, when you're in your early 20s, it's really about your savings rate. How much should I be saving to live the life I want to live and move in the direction I want to move? And so we thought we'd do some numbers. We thought we'd put some math behind this.
Well, and I love this because I know what's coming. And we tell you need to be saving 20 to 25% of your gross income. 25% is to grow. The goal, I don't know why I said grow, but it is the goal to grow it.
It also is the grow.
But here's the thing that I think is always a lot of you guys, just like I talked about, you're in a struggle. You're brand new. You're freshly minted in the workforce. There is a battle for every dollar that comes from your paycheck. Is that going to rent? Is that going to student loans? Is that going to car payments? But here's the great news. A little goes a tremendously long way. And you're going to see that as we start showing you these stats, because here's what we've set up. We basically did a calculation where we were saying, if you just wanted to have a retirement lifestyle that had replaced 60% of your working wages, because let's face it, when you retire, you're not going to have as much in taxes.
Sure.
You're not going to have to save for retirement anymore. I sure hope you're debt-free at this point. So 60% of your gross income is going to probably serve you pretty well in retirement.
And then there's Social Security and other things that can help out with that.
So we did that. And we for this decade, we got the 20-year-olds, we got the 25-year-olds, and we got the 29-year-olds. And we wanted to replace 60%. This is what you should save. And then on the far right, we have, but if you save 20%, what would it produce? And here's what's amazing. Because your army of dollars are so powerful when you're 20 years of age, you only need to save 9% of your gross income to reach 60% of your working wages.
And so I'm encouraged by that because remember, we just said that the average person in their 20s saves about 7.5%, 7.4%. Well, if having an employer match on top of that, maybe that's 3%, great. We're hitting that number. If we're close to 10%, we're hitting that number for a 20-year-old. But you listening to the show are not the average 20-year-old. You're not the folks that are sitting on the sidelines. You are financial mutants. You're the ones that get it. If you save 20% of your income starting at age 20, and again, we just assumed a 1.5% wage growth rate. If you can save 20%, by the time you get to retirement, you will be able to replace 134% of your pre-retirement income, not your age 20 income, your pre-retirement income. When you retire, you actually get a pay raise. You get to spend more money. You get to live like no one else because you made the decisions to save for the future and get your army of dollar bills working.
But it's not just for 20-year-olds. I mean, because think about this. 25-year-olds, you're also in a powerful situation. 11% will replace 60%, and then you're still going to get a pay raise in retirement if you're just saving 20% of your gross income. That will probably get you a retirement that's 105% of your working wages.
If you're someone who waits, though, and you don't start earlier in your 20s, and you start from zero, starting at age 29 at the end of the decade, if you want to replace 60% of your pre-retirement income, you do need to save about 14%. So now we're getting closer to that 20 to 25% that we always talk about. But if you can save 20% starting at 29, you will be able to replace 86% of your pre-retirement income. And remember, you're not going to have taxes, you're not going to have savings, you're going to have other sources of income. That should get you pretty excited if you're in your 20s, beginning your journey of building financial independence. All right, Brian, so we've talked about our 20s. We've talked about the folks that are just starting out, beginning on their wealth building journey. Now let's talk about the 30s, because this is the decade that we call the messy middle. Life is starting to move really, really fast, and it's easy to take our eye off the ball of building financial independence. We have to make sure that even when we have all these different things pulling us in all these different directions, we remember saving is important and our dollars still have juice, even in our 30s, that can have huge impacts later in life.
When I see this headline, it makes me think of the Ferris Bueller's quote, but it is one of those things where I just don't want you to get caught up, exactly what Bo said, into the messy middle, that you wake up 10, 15, 20 years in the future and you go, how did I miss out on all the opportunity of letting my army of dollar bills do all the hard work? So we do have some data points to share on how important your 30s are.
So first, let's do a little spot check, right? 401k balances in your 30s. According to Fidelity Investments, they surveyed all their 401k participants, and the average 401k balance for someone in their 30s is $50,800. So, it's better than the 20s. It's growing, so that's not bad. You can see kind of where you stand there. When we look at salary deferrals or participant contribution rates, the average for someone in their 30s is 8.3%. So it has improved from their 20-year-old counterparts, but we're still not at that 20 to 25%. Remember, that's our goal. We want to be saving 20 to 25% of our gross income. Our 30-year-olds are doing a little better, but they're not quite there yet. And then if you want kind of a spot check as you think about closing out the 30s decade, where should you be from an overall portfolio, overall saving standpoint? By the time you get to the end of your 30s decade, you want to have about 2.5 times your annual income saved up. So whatever you're making at age 39 or 40, multiply it by 2.5, and that is where your total portfolio should be, according to Fidelity Investments.
And I want to give a little context on this because we just finished the 20s, but I know we break these into highlight videos at some point. realize when you come into your 30s, you're hoping you have like 1.2 times your income. You close out your 30s at 2.6 times your income. So you're hoping that you come into the decade with probably 1 times your income, but you leave it with close to 3 times.
That's huge.
You've got to let your army of dollar bills build. And let's kind of talk about, let's put some numbers to this. If you're saving, if you're a 30-something and you're saving at least 15%, you can replace 60% of your working wages when you retire in the future. That's how powerful even your dollars are at 30. If you're a financial mutant and you're saving at least 20% of your gross income, you will actually replace 81% of your working wages when you retire.
Now, what I think is beautiful here, Brian, is remember, what we did is we took the wage for a 30-year-old and we grew it at about 1.5% per year. So we're not talking about like age 30 wages. We're actually talking about wages when you get to retirement. Well, if you're someone who saves 20%, right, and you're saving, that means that right off the cuff, you're living off of less than 80% of what you make. And you also have taxes and that sort of thing built in. So even if you're a 30-year-old and you haven't done anything in your 20s decade, but you're just starting, but you can commit to saving 20% of your income, you will still get a pay raise when you get to retirement. You can set it up so that you actually get to spend more in retirement than you did pre-retirement.
That's a great point because of taxes and retirement savings, but it's a slippery slope because you're going to see as you get older, these numbers are increasing pretty rapidly. By the time you're 35 years of age, you need to be saving 19% of your gross income to replace 60% of your retirement. And you can see that flows over right over to what we're showing with if you save 20%, it's going to replace 62%. So you can see how those numbers kind of correlate. And then fast forward to when you're 39 years of age. Now here we are, we're getting really close to that hyper saving status that you need to be saving 24% of your gross income to replace 60%. And then if you're saving 20%, you just waited until 39 to start the retirement saving process, you can expect to replace just right under 50% of your working wages.
So I hope as you're kind of watching this, as you're kind of following this journey, you're recognizing that the sooner you start, the easier it is, the less burden there is, the less difficult it is to build wealth. The longer you wait to begin the process, the harder it becomes. The more disciplined you have to be, the more diligent you have to be. So the sooner you can figure this out, the better you're going to set yourself up for the long term. All right, so let's talk a little bit about a spot check, okay? When we look at the average balance of a 401k for folks in their 40s, again, this is data compiled by Fidelity. The average 401k balance for a Fidelity participant is about $121,000. So we've now gotten into six-figure land.
Well, now, but here's something, just to dissect this.
Okay.
We covered, when we were covering 30s, we said by the time you enter into your 40s, you want to have close to 3 times your income as you approach 40. Here we are seeing that the average for the entire decade of your 40s is 120. I mean, if you divide that by 3, that's $40,000 a year. I think that that's not where income is. I think people are actually behind. That's not reflective of 3 times their income.
Well, and that makes sense, Brian, because when you look at the average savings rate for someone in their 40s, it's only 8.9%. And again, I don't want to downplay someone who's saving 9%, but that's not the 20 to 25 that we talk about. If you want to have a meaningful change, if you want to be a financial mutant, there's a chance, unless you start really early on, back at 20 years old, just saving 9% of your pay is not going to get you there. It's not going to get the job done.
Yeah, and then also don't forget, because I always want to give you a goalpost to kind of set for where you should close out the decade at. As you approach 50, I want you to have close to 5 times your income. That's what Fidelity is recommending according to their research. You are hopefully leaving this decade with close to 5 times your income.
And hopefully you're getting excited about the wealth building journey at this point. Remember, when you left your 20s, it was 1.2 times your income. And then when you left your 30s, it was like 2.5 to 3 times. And now we're at 5. So it's almost like it's doubling or close to doubling every decade. Now you should start to be seeing, if you've done it right, if things are starting to gel, you should begin thinking like, okay, this thing is attainable. This vision that I've been dreaming about, this work that I've been doing, is starting to pay off. I'm starting to see it begin to take shape.
So let's put some numbers to this. We know that what is probably an acceptable, a good retirement is if you can replace 60% of your working wages when you retire. How much would you have to save at both 40, 45, and 49? Here's what we came up with. Now, this is assuming you started at zero at each of these
40,
ages.
yep.
You can see if you come into your 40 years of age, if you save 26% of your gross income, you're going to be able to replace about 60% of your retirement income.
Now, here's what I'll say to that. If you have waited till 40, if you have just kind of done whatever and you're sitting at zero at 40, you got to get busy.
Yeah.
You got to get to work. You have no time to waste because our goal is always 20 to 25% saving. Well, if you wait till 40, you got to be at the top end of that. You got to be at 26% to replace 60% of your pre-retirement income. There's no time to waste.
So let's fast forward to 45. Look at this. This is, guys, it's important. You can still do it. The FIRE people have shown you this. There's all kind of 20, 30, 35-year-olds. They're saving 40, 50% of their gross income. You too, if you're just now starting, you're watching this show and you're 45 years of age, you need to be saving 36% of your gross income to have that retirement that provides about 60% of your working wages.
And then if you wait until you're 49, wait until the end of your 40s, you have to save almost half, 48% of your income to be able to retire on 60% of your pre-retirement income. I think this is so interesting, Brian, because I've heard you say this over and over and over again. When it comes to investing, when it comes to building wealth, time can either be your biggest ally or it can be your biggest adversary.
That's exactly right.
Those are the two options. If you figure it out early, if you figure out how to start getting your army of dollar bills working, it can be a huge ally and it can be the wind in your sails taking you to financial abundance. But as you see here, if you wait and you allow your time to constrict, it can be a huge adversary where the climb to overcome that mountain becomes extremely, extremely difficult.
Let's talk about something I'm quickly approaching.
Okay.
50s and beyond. This is, I'm hoping this is a point of celebration for you because you're a wise field general. There's not a dollar that's in your army that you haven't, counseled well and you put them into very efficient places so they can be maximized. They're not locked into, just sitting in the bank account, not doing what they're supposed to. But I'm also worried that this could be a cautionary tale. There's a lot of people that they're at this stage starting to look back and going, man, if I'd have just known about this then, I could have done it differently.
If you want to kind of give yourself an assessment, if you want to do a litmus test of how you stand up to next to your peers, according to data compiled by Fidelity, the average 401k for someone in their 50s in this country is about $204,000, right? So now this is someone who's approaching retirement, approaching financial independence, getting that stage of life. They've got saved about $204,000.
Now look, I'm interrupting again because I did this last time. I still don't think that's enough because I told we as we did the 40s, we know as you approach your 50s, you're supposed to be approaching close to 5 times your working income. If you take $203,000 divided by 5, that's a little over $40,000. These 50-somethings are making more than $40,000. It's not an income issue. We have a savings and a building of assets problem. That's not good.
Now, another thing that we see in this data is that the average contribution rate for someone in their 50s is about 10.5%. Now, I think what that means is folks in their 50s have not taken seriously that, oh man, I need to be saving 20 to 25%. But I want to flip this around, Brian, because you say something all the time. When you and your wife were early on in your wealth building journey, you told her, you said, hey, if we can just go pedal to the metal in our 20s and 30s, and we can save aggressively and get our army of dollar bills built up, by the time we get to our 40s and 50s, we can take our foot off the pedal. We can slow down. We can save a little bit less. I would like to think that the reason the savings rate for people in their 50s is 10% is because they've reached that stage where they could take the foot off the pedal. But I don't think, judging by that average 401k balance, I don't think that's the case.
Well, I think you have to flip the coin over. I think what actually happens, and we see this when you're talking to people just out in the general public, is that they realize the mortality is there and they're only 10, 15 years from retirement. And they're like, there's a reason this decade's savings rate is higher than 20-somethings, 30-somethings, and 40-somethings. I think that people start panicking, and you do see that contribution rate tick up. But you're right. If you do this right, and you're a wise field general, there's potential. You've already reached some level of success, and that's why I say it's a moment of celebration. But for, I think, the vast majority, the non-financial mutants, it is a little scary.
Now, in your 50s, you can see the landing, right? You may be entering into retirement in your 50s, or certainly you're thinking about it in your 60s. Your landing gear is down. So if you want to know, okay, where should I be? Where should my total portfolio value be? According to Fidelity, you should have about 8.1 times your annual income saved by the end of your 50s. By the time you get to age 60, you should have a little over 8 times your income saved, according to Fidelity.
Yeah, and I'll take it a step further. By the time you're 65, it should be close to 10 times your income. So pay attention to those numbers, because this is when you are bringing it in for a landing, you need to be paying attention. Now, I've given a lot of cold water on this, but I still think that there's opportunities even for latecomers. Because when we pull up the stats for where a 50-year-old, if you save 52%. Now, I know that's crazy. That is because we got taxes. But there are fire people. There are 20-somethings, there are 30-somethings that are showing you this can be done. Even a 50-year-old starting from scratch, this is incredible to me to think about that you save 52%. You still have a chance to retire in 15 short years and let your army of dollar bills give you a retirement that's 60% of your working income.
Now, I think the 50 is probably the last step on that, right? Because if you wait until you're 55 to start, if you're at 0 going into 55, you'd have to save 85% of your earned income to be able to retire at 60% of your pre-retirement income by 65. I think realistically, what you probably have to do is if you're waiting until 55 to start, you have to have some real conversations with yourself around, is 65 actually my retirement number? Or do I need to work a little bit longer? Do I need to bridge the gap until I can start drawing Social Security? How can I begin to reformat my plan to actually have a plan in place?
Or definitely expand out the working career. I mean, you're probably going 70, 75. Good news is technology, healthcare expanding. Sure. I think there's always an opportunity to find goodness, an opportunity to move forward.
For those of us who have access to 401k accounts, to employer-sponsored retirement accounts, they can be tremendous wealth building tools, whether it be because of the free employer money that our employer puts in, or whether it be because I get a tax benefit from putting in pre-tax contributions, or I get a tax-free benefit from doing Roth contributions. Make sure you're not squandering this opportunity to utilize a 401k to be a huge tool in your tool belt of building long-term financial wealth.
I know there's a lot of financial mutants out there, and you have crossed into 7-figure status by just being good at letting your army of dollar bills work through saving, through investing. And you're probably getting to the point where I've often said, this is why the abundance cycle is self-fulfilling and I can just give away so much free information. I know a lot of you guys are great do-it-yourselfers, and it's easy when life is simple. But the more successful you are, the more complicated the decisions become. Plus, you're also now the CEO of a 7-figure business. If you think about it, if you look at your retirement plans, you look at all the assets you've saved, you are now the CEO of a 7-figure business. That's some decisions. You don't know what you don't know, and you also worry about legacy. You worry about, am I taking on too much risk? This all gets to be, even I don't care how good you are, you're probably going to want a co-pilot. And that's why I know Complexity will find the successful people out there so we can give it away. You can come learn, apply, grow the concepts we're teaching you. But when you reach that level of success and you go, you know what? I need to get somebody in here. That's where the abundance cycle pays off. The cycle completes itself because you take the relationship to the next level because you remember who planted those seeds.